Good evening and welcome to Upside Down for this week. We're here getting ready for Holy Week and looking at that journey. We're going to talk about another journey today, and that is the journey towards answering the call to ministry. And I want to start off by acknowledging that, as the Book of Discipline points out, the call to ministry is a call that comes at a baptism for all of those who are in relationship with Jesus, the discipleship. And Jesus was calling the disciples. He was preparing them not to be followers, but to be leaders. And they move in that time of resurrection and the coming of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost from being those who are following Jesus to those who are extending the work of the gospel. And in John chapter 14, Jesus says, "You will do even greater things than these." So he wants to understand that that work of faith is not something that was settled and done in his earthly ministry, but that was just the beginning. And then it goes on, the gospel continues, and that we're a part of that, all of us, by virtue of our baptism, being in relationship there. But there are also those who feel called to do that work of shepherding, to do that work, continuing the work of the apostles, that work of teaching, that work of guiding, and that work and we'll get onto this, that work of administration and gathering folks together. So I want to introduce to you to somebody you already know, and that's the Reverend Dr. Brian Tipton, who is our connectional teaching pastor at Community UMC, also working with four congregations and kind of a cooperative parish that's coming together here. He has already served in a teaching capacity, and he has been doing a lot of different work in a lot of different places. But I want to go back, Brian, and have you share with us, when did you have that first inkling, that first sense that God intended you to do something beyond something supportive of the work of all Christians, that call to being in ministry through a leadership position in the church?
If I think back, I don't think I realized it at the time. That's what was happening, but I can remember a very specific point in time. It was around 2008, 2008 when Prop 8 was happening. And I had a lot of friends who were trying to figure out how they were going to vote around Prop 8. And I was trying to get some folks to understand that from a theological perspective, that love matters, that who folks love matters, and that love isn't a sin. It can't be a sin. It's love. Um, there was a specific moment where, after the election happened, one of my really good friends who had voted, I always get it mixed up. I think she must have voted yes. So then that meant she was voting for marriage to be only between a man and a woman. We were sitting in her car, and she basically broke down crying with me in her car and said, "I now understand that I've done the wrong thing, that this was not an act of love." And I can remember in that moment that something was happening, something was stirring, and I was playing a role in that I didn't quite yet understand. Um, and I knew I wanted to be a part of that conversation from outside of the church. And that's why I ended up going to seminary with no intent whatsoever of being a part of the church, of going in the ordination process, that I want to do it from the outside. Um, but God was working on me and in me and through me at that time. And I think that was the start of the call without me even recognizing it.
And and when did you more formalize that? When did I mean, you were raised in the church, yes?
No, 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 no. I did not go to church. My parents were anti-establishment hippies. Uh, my mom grew up going to St. John's in Costa Mesa, and she did not like the church. She thought it was only there to take your money. And it was not until I went to seminary and one of my best friends invited me to church. I'd gone to church before, at the behest of my now wife, Christine, when we were dating. And she basically was like, you have to go to church with me if we're going to date. She's like, you don't have to believe any of it, but you still have to come. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I left frustrated. I left angry when I would go to church there, just because the way I understood the world did not align with the way that they spoke their theology, basically. But fast forward, I end up Prop 8 happens. I'm like, this is something that I want to be a part of. I want to be a part of this conversation around human sexuality in the church. And I go to seminary with the end goal of getting a PhD. While I'm there, one of my good friends says, "Hey, I think you should go to church with me." He happened to be Methodist. He's like, "I think you'll be really happy, or you'll be interested in the way that we do church." And I said, "No." And he kept
Okay,
bugging
I
me,
would interrupt for a second. What were you planning on doing with the PhD?
be a professor and basically teach future clergy.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So he kept inviting me, he kept bugging me, I kept saying no, and eventually I said yes. And I went to church, and it was the first time I left not angry and felt like, maybe I could exist inside this space in some way. Um, Spent a few years there, and then all of a sudden found myself feeling like, wait, maybe I'm a part of this conversation from within. And that kind of started the journey of, wait, am I supposed to be going through the ordination process for some reason? I don't know. It felt strange. There was something stirring inside of me that I just didn't understand, couldn't really grasp what the feelings were inside. But I said, I'm going to see what this is about. Um, and then I sat down with my pastor at Summit UMC in New Jersey, and we had the conversation. And she said, "Sounds like you're ready to start this process." And that was the beginning.
Okay. And what did that consist of?
Uh, if I remember correctly, it was having a good number of conversations with her. I met with somebody else who was a faculty member at Drew Theological School, who was a deacon, and she sat me down and she said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I didn't know if I was sure yet. Um, the way she framed it was, if you're sitting on a plane going on a trip and you're by yourself and somebody sits down next to you and you start having a conversation with them and they ask you what you do, and if you say, "I'm a pastor," the conversation is going to completely shift. Your life will never be the same. The way people relate to you will never be the same. Are you ready for that? At that point, I wasn't completely sure. But I said, let's see. And I kept meeting with Pastor Sean, and we had to read a book, Christian as Minister. Is
A
that
Christian as minister.
Christian as Minister? Yeah. So we read the book together, and then I sent off an email to the DS declaring that I wanted to start my candidacy in the ordination process as a deacon.
And you knew at that point you wanted to be a deacon.
Yep.
So for those who are not familiar with that role, other than that it's in the New Testament, in in the United Methodist tradition, what is the role of the deacon?
So the language that's usually used in the Methodist Church is that the deacon functions as a bridge between the church and the world. The way I explain it is, a lot of times they're the folks that are running nonprofits, that are doing the work of Christ in the world. They'll be yoked, they'll be connected to the church, but that's not their main focus, their main purpose. But that their main purpose is to be out in the world, serving with a focus on justice and compassion in the world, bringing Christ into the world and then carrying that back to the church and making sure the two are connected.
I just love the fact that I've come to really appreciate the uh, New Testament book of the Acts of the Apostles, Luke Part Two, and the way that uh, the apostles want to be focusing on teaching. They want to be focusing on sharing the gospel. They want to be focused on doing this work with leadership, and that they realize that they're getting caught up in dealing with money and dealing with making sure that everybody is treated fairly, and that's important work. It's very important work, and so they find a way to have people lifted up to become these helpers, these deacons in that role. And I always think that so many of my clergy colleagues get focused on the administrative work as if that's what shows their value in
Hmm. Hmm.
ministry, and that has to be reserved for us. And it's like, no, the apostles were really generous in sharing that work and saying, oh, that stuff. That's the stuff, that hands-on work we want to give and give up and make sure that that's done well. And so there are people who have special blessings and gifts for that, and we want them to be able to do that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think looking at Acts and looking at this role of the deacon, diakonos, the Greek word, it means servant, which is different than the word slave, which would be doulos. And so it's meant to be a servant ministry where you lead folks in serving others and caring for the community and caring for other folks around you. And I think it's a really important ministry at this moment in time, in particular, we find ourselves.
So you had that conversation, um, and then what steps did you take? How long did you sit with that?
This was 14 years ago. So that's a while to try to
Yeah.
remember back to what things were like at that point and how long things took. I don't recall. I don't fully remember. Um, I do remember being asked to preach at some point
Hmm.
at the church and feeling like I should do that, but didn't really know what that meant or what that would look like. Um, but I did it. And I made it very experiential for folks, and I think it went well. But I think at that point in time, so much of what I was doing was in my head, and that I hadn't fully gotten to the point where I realized that a lot of what I needed to do was in my heart and doing a lot of soul searching. I mean, if you think about how when I first started this, it was about I wanted to change people's minds.
Yes.
Eventually, there's a realization of I am called to change people's hearts, and in order to do that, I have to listen to my heart. And it took a long time for that to click. And that's why, honestly, the ordination process itself has been so helpful for me. Is I wouldn't have done that because of my childhood, because of the ways in which I'm a lot of times emotionally cut off. It forced me to explore that, and that was really important for me personally.
And how did you explore that?
Oh man, so many different things. One of the steps that's required in the ordination process, I don't know if it's a CalPAC thing or a larger Methodist thing, I can't recall, is doing CPE, so clinical pastoral education.
Yes.
And basically what that is it's learning how to be pastoral. Um, Usually you do it in a hospital setting. A lot of times it's a program where you have an instructor and they help you kind of figure out what it means to be pastoral in a hospital setting where you have no control, where you can't fix things. It takes that desire to fix a problem and completely removes it. And then you're just with the people exploring where they're at that point in time. Um, and for me, by default, I'm a fixer. If somebody says something's wrong, I want to fix it. And actually ended up not doing it in a hospital. I did it with church folks through a special program that Methodist Church has. But it still was the time in which I was able to explore a lot of those things. And CPE ends up being about yourself in that it forces you to explore your inner working so that then that doesn't come out when you're with folks providing pastoral care and bringing your stuff to the table that makes it so that it's no longer about them and caring for them. It ends up being about you, and it's trying to remove that in some way.
Well, a huge part of CPE is doing the evaluation of what you've done within a community of people who are in this same kind of a setting, looking at
Yes.
what did you say, how did you say it, what did that mean, how did that work, and
Yeah.
really the encouragement that comes from that. Uh,
Yeah.
that it's not about fixing. I had experience when I did. Sometimes CPE is done in prison settings. Now, I didn't do my CPE in a
That's
prison
right.
setting, but I did do Kairos prison ministry one time. And one of the things, one of their mantras is listen, listen, love, love. because you can't fix anything. You can't do much of anything. I mean, that's an experience of powerlessness. To
Yeah.
be able to go there and a fixer, it's like, that's where I came up with my own phrase for myself that I say over and over again, which is listening is fixing, listening is fixing, listening is fixing. It
Yeah.
allows for that self-reflection, and that self-reflection is done in CPE. So, so yes, CPE is required in CalPAC. It's not in other conferences. I think it's growing more to be so for that very work, that introspective work, learning, to what it is to be in ministry and have that time of reflection. That comes after various steps. There are again within the United Methodist Church. I think of us as being like an onion sometimes. That there's all these layers, and all those different layers are called conferences. And so the first thing that you do in terms of the process is that you have a conversation with your pastor. And then you have a conversation with your local congregation.
To
And
say, yeah, I
because what
remember
you
that
want to
now.
do is
Yeah.
for them to support you. And so at the annual charge conference or church conference, there is a vote that's taken of whether they see in you the potential for ministry. And with that recommendation goes, you talk with the superintendent of the district. There's a district conference, and then within that district structure, you go and meet with the district committee on ordained ministry and begin to do that exploration. And they you have an introductory meeting with them, and at some point you become a certified candidate. And there's papers that are written, there's background checks that are done, there's a psychological evaluation that happens with that. All of this is designed for accountability, for being responsible. And there are some folks who, at this stage, whether they're going on to go to seminary or are looking to go a different track for their education, uh, become a licensed local pastor. And that is somebody who is not ordained but is given a license after examination to work in a local church setting and to serve as a pastor in that setting. Now they have to go back every year with the district committee for review. But the other path is whether that is only temporary or whether that's being there for the rest of their time in the church. Uh, there is also the path towards ordination. And in our process, we have a stage towards that where, after again being examined and recommended by the district conference or district council on district committee on ordained ministry, you go before the board of ordained ministry of the annual conference, the region for the area.
I distinctly remember going through the process with a local congregation. And
Mhm.
looking back, that is vital. The reason why that's vital is because that's them recognizing that there's something inside of you. There's something there that's set apart.
Yes.
And they're saying, yes, we see that, and we want to travel on this journey with you. It's a process of learning to be a pastor, but also having just that thing that's inside of you bloom and come to fruition. Um, and they're saying, yeah, there's something there, and we want to see you live into who you are.
Mhm.
And I think that's a vital part of this process, looking back, because that's something that doesn't go away through the whole process. It's
So
even happening still
2008, you
now.
have this sense of call and you start exploring it. At some point after that, you go in New Jersey, you go in the local church. Where was that church in New Jersey?
In New Jersey, in Summit, New Jersey, and that probably would have been 2011, 12,
Okay.
somewhere in there.
Okay.
Wait, no, I know this. I declared, or I sent the email to the DS in 2013. So I would have then gone in front of the church at Charge Conference that year,
All right.
2013.
So 13 years ago.
13 years ago. Yeah.
Those of you who are watching and considering, don't panic. It doesn't have to be that long. But there are intentional pauses along the way for this time of reflection because those steps are important, and taking it seriously. Then you after that you went in New Jersey before the district committee,
Yes. Yes.
and
And
there,
it's a lot of conversations around theology and trying to make sure that you understand what it means to be a Methodist in terms of theology. Uh, Sometimes they're really hard questions
Hmm.
that you need to wrestle with because you need to know for yourself what you believe. Because that's going to affect how you function as a pastor. Uh, and so I remember some pretty difficult questions that I had to wrestle with for a while at that
Such as.
point. Universalism. So the belief that, uh, for me, the way I would explain it is that God is such a big God that when Christ died and was raised, it covered the sin of everyone. It did the job for everybody. And so there were some really hard questions around that, like what happens if the question I got, which is the kind of default question for stuff like this is, well, then how do you think Jewish folks feel in heaven when they see Hitler? These are really hard theological questions that they ask you, and you have to look deep inside of what, where do you go with that?
Universalism says that then everybody's in heaven when we die.
I mean, at that point, in the way I was thinking about it. And
Hmm.
so that was the kind of conversation that unfolded from there. There are different concepts of universalism. Um, this idea that Christ can be the universal Christ for all, but you have to believe and exist in a way to where you end up finding yourself with God in the end. That's a whole nother conversation. Uh,
Well, but it gets to something you were talking about earlier. You were talking about how you had kind of gone in wanting to change people's minds and realizing that you're looking more to change people's hearts. What is the purpose of the church?
Change the hearts and minds for transformation of the world.
That question there is the purpose of the church to get people into heaven.
No.
Well, what's the church good for?
Oh, am I in a board of ordained ministry interview right now?
This is what it feels like sometimes.
Yeah. In my understanding, the purpose of the church is to bring the light of Christ into the world so that folks can experience it, so they can experience the grace of God in a way to where they are able to see that another way is possible. That that the kingdom of God can exist in heaven, but also here.
Mhm.
And that is our job as followers of Christ to help in co-creating that world with God here. If you were to ask me that type of question at the beginning of the process, I would have had probably no words. I would have just sat there.
Well,
But there's a process in which you do this type of reflection, and it's not about, actually, this is really helpful. I was told years ago, just play the game to get through the process.
mm,
And I personally believe that is shortchanging yourself if you do that. Because to me, I needed the growth process in order to get where I am now. And if I were just playing the game, it would have never happened.
as somebody who's involved with district committee, I I want to say it's just as necessary for the church as it is for the candidate to have that
Mm,
piece. We're looking. Um, there's all sorts of reasons that people go into ministry, but what we need is people who are in ministry to help, yes, make disciples, help expand that understanding of the kingdom of God, to help develop that relationship and create vibrant communities of faith and to shepherd those communities. And so we take that process seriously to examine there. And yes, it is possible to game the system. I've seen it happen. Um, but you are shortchanging yourself and you're shortchanging the church if you do so.
yeah.
So at the same time, there are certain things. In fact, I was leading confirmation class this last Sunday, and we are talking about communion. And Marty said to me, make sure you talk about grace when you're talking about said, thank you, Marty, because one of the things I say to candidates going through is if you're talking about the sacraments and you don't use the term means of grace and understand what that means, expect to not get very far in the process because
Correct.
it's what is God do? One of our favorite questions of the district, what is God doing in communion? We know what the clergy person is doing, but what is God doing in communion? And because and then we come to baptism, same kind of question. It's like we focus so often on what's going on in the person being baptized. What's God doing in baptism? That's the whole point of this within the community of faith. And so these are things that are explored there, things are discussed. I will say that serving on the district committee, I love it because it helps keep me sharp because I keep asking myself the same questions. As a committee,
Mm.
what is this? Well, what am I doing? What what is God calling me to do and to be? Well, as we go through the process, the questions that we ask, does this person show promise? Is this person called? Is this person equipped and skilled? And finally, is this person bearing fruit?
Mm.
And so after the district committee, the next is to go before the board of ministry, and that's some of the questions that are asked. That's why the process works as it did there. Talk about that for a bit. Your experience with the board of ordained ministry. At some point in time, you came here to California and got with the district committee here in California, which recommended you to then go before the board of ordained ministry. And there,
Yes. So I started the process technically in 13. We moved back out here in 2017. I had never gone before the board before. I went before the board of ordained ministry 3 times. And this is pre-COVID. So it's kind of hard to remember some of the dynamics that were happening there. Um, but looking back, that third time, I felt as though I was ready in that I told myself and I told God, if I don't pass this time, I'm out of the process.
hmm, that wasn't a threat. That was just a
That
recognition.
was
Well,
just a recognition of where things were and feeling like maybe this isn't right. I
so the
don't
first time
know.
you went before the board, they approved you for provisional membership.
No, I
No.
went before the board for provisional 3 times.
Oh, you went before provisional 3 times.
Yeah. And it wasn't until the third time that I got through. And there were a lot of things that happened in between that first time and then in 2022 when I was commissioned, when the Board of Ordained Ministry said yes for provisional membership. For those that don't know, provisional membership, it's kind of like when you get a new job and you're on probation for 90 days in the Methodist Church. It's a similar thing where it's 2 years and there's a handful of steps that you have to take. So it oftentimes takes longer than 2 years. Um, but one of the things that happened is that my mom passed away, and that was in 2020. And it was in the midst of that process where my mom was on hospice, and I effectively guided her through that process. And I can remember sitting the day after my mom died. At that point, I had a truck. I was sitting in my truck in my driveway, and I was talking with a life mentor from back in New Jersey and telling the story of how I realized in that process that I was guiding her. And though she would never name it this way, I was being a pastor in that moment for my mom. And that is when the call, I fully felt it. It fully clicked that day.
Ooh.
This is something I've been exploring for how long? For 7 years, trying to figure out what is all of this. And then all of a sudden, it just all became clear. It, I joke, but it's true. It took my mom dying for me to understand who I am. But I've been doing it all along, and I just didn't see it for some reason. And then I've had conversations since then where people would say, "You were such a vital role at that point in my life that probably wouldn't be here today if it weren't for you. And I had no idea that was even happening. It's just, again, it's not, we don't act as pastors. It's just part of who we are. And it takes, I believe it takes this process to be able to fully see it and understand it. And that's why I find it really important. And then I passed in 2022, 2 years later.
And then this past year, well, actually last year, you went up for full connection. So that's like
Correct.
getting tenure, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and that year they said no again, right? They continued to.
They didn't say no. They said not yet.
Not yet. Ah, another phrase they like to make sure that they're clear here. We're not saying no, not go away, but
There are moments where they do say that if they feel
yes,
that it's necessary. Few and far between, but they will. But usually it's not yet.
you were in the midst in this where they've instituted something new, which is teams. And
Yes.
the idea is you meet with the same team as you go through. I mean, of course, there's changes every year to the board, so it's like changes to the team. But you meet with the same team as you go through the process, and the teams come out and visit the site that you're at. And and again, this past year or last year, they said not yet. And then I want to get into what's happened this year in that process with that team. Part of the team came out to hear you preach and to see you in context. And share with that a little about that, if you would.
What about for this year?
Yeah,
Oh, okay. So uh, I did my site visit at Mesa Verde United Methodist Church. That was very intentional. That's where my office is. It's just very close to home, so it makes the logistics easier. Um, and I had this sermon that I had been sitting with for months that I wanted to give, but it didn't ever make sense there, at least. It hadn't yet. And then I decided, okay, I'm gonna preach it there. And then it just happened to be the day that two of the board members came to do the site visit. And I preached on immigration. It was in the midst of when ICE had just recently started taking part in the actions that are what I described in the sermon was they were dishonoring the image of God in people through their actions, through tear gassing, through other actions. Um, and I felt it went well. I knew that there was going to be some pushback. I didn't realize how much pushback there was going to be. And it prompted a lot of self-reflection and a lot of realizing I think I knew a lot of this of what it means to preach the story of God to people, but I needed to be more connected to the feelings of it in some way and how folks would feel what I was saying. And there was, I hurt people. The way in which I said certain things hurt people. And this is why we have the process so that we can take the moments for self reflection rather than just pushing forward. And I met with colleagues, and I ended up meeting with some of the folks from the congregation and understanding what was happening. And it was a huge shift for me personally in understanding my role and understanding the call. And in particular, what I had learned my call was over however many years was to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And some of you have heard me say this before. Some of you have heard me preach about this before. Um, but I realized in that process that when you afflict the comfortable, you create a room of afflicted people, and it can't end there. And I had some really amazing conversations that came out of it. I hurt people, but there was healing, there was hope, there was growth, and it's that's a big reason why the board this time around was able to say, yeah, You're ready. This is it.
You started off by talking about how you felt called to change hearts and the recognition that causing discomfort is not the end in itself. Acknowledging the discomfort, making something so that it's uncomfortable, so it has to be dealt with, is part of that process of changing hearts.
Yeah.
But there has to be the follow. But it requires that ongoing relationship,
Yeah.
and that's why there's a difference between the prophet and the pastor,
Yeah.
between the person who's building community. I'm so because it's a challenge that all of us are facing, particularly in this moment of time.
Yeah.
I oftentimes have talked about it like, making taffy. You have to pull some, but you can't pull too hard. You don't want to break. And so to see you go through that, and for the board to be able to see you go through that, for that and the message that you gave at community when I was gone, and you shared really from your heart. And I came back and folks said, he's like a different person.
Yeah.
Um, it was personal, but it was also, it felt like you were part of the church community, and with them, and I think that's what one of the reasons that there was that recognition, both by the board and by so many of us who've been watching you through this process. 13 years.
13 years. Again, if you're considering this, it's not 13
16
years
from
for
the
everybody.
from the first nudging. 16 from the first nudging of you. No,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 18 from the first nudging.
18. Yeah, I was gonna say it's 18. Yeah. It's
18 from
probably
the first nudging of you.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you're still a young guy. So,
Tell that to my elbow. It's just not really happy with me right now.
so in June, in the morning, on a Saturday morning in June, you will be ordained in full connection as a deacon in the California Pacific Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church.
God
And
willing.
yes, we still have to vote on you technically at the
Gotcha.
at the clergy session. That really is a formality, but I'll, I'll be very happy to vote yes for you with that. And for any of you who are wanting to be out there, I strongly suggest that you carpool, because parking is going to be very difficult at looking to when we're out there for
Yeah.
that ordination service. But it will also be available streamed on video for those who want to participate in that way. So we may have a streaming party at our four congregations here to watch and participate in that way. But our prayers, our hearts will be with you. Anything else that you want to say to somebody who is feeling that sense of call to ministry, um, in the ordained or licensed role within the United Methodist Church?
It's a journey of self-reflection, and it's a marathon.
Mm.
It
Not a
doesn't
sprint.
just happen. What?
Not a sprint.
Not a sprint. Not a sprint. It's a marathon. Um, the marathon is there for a reason. And if you are already ready, I've had friends that it was very clear they are who they are. They understand that. They're living it out. The process was just a breeze. It was just smooth. For some of us, we're stubborn. We're have a lot of rough edges. It takes longer, but the refinement is necessary.
Mm.
And be willing to live into that, because in the end, what you'll when you come out of it, you will be better for it, and you'll be able to serve better because of it.
Oh,
Yeah.
bless you all on that journey. We'll see you next time. Upside down.